Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 17th chapter. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Now, keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." This is the gospel of our Lord. And I invite you to please be seated. Does anyone remember that late 1970s Coke commercial that featured Pittsburgh Steelers star Mean Joe Green? Anybody remember that commercial? Mean Joe Green was hobbling down the stadium tunnel after a long game, and lo and behold, as Green hobbles, a young boy turns and follows Green down the tunnel. He was sort of lagging behind a bit, his icy cold Coke in hand, of course. He asked Mr. Mean Joe, Mr. Green, do you need any help?" "No," Green says. That's when the boy offers Green his bottle of Coke. I just want you to know, Mr. Green, I think you're the best ever," he says. "Yeah, sure, kid," Green says. And of course, he offers that bottle of Coke. Green says no at first, but then he takes it, and what does he do? He drinks the whole thing down. And the boy, he sort of turns, he's kind of dejected and disappointed in this character, and he starts to walk away when all of a sudden, Green yells out at the kid, "Hey kid, catch." And the kid turns, and Big Mean Joe Green throws that game jersey at him. And that's when this boy, he can't believe it, a real jersey from his idol, Mean Joe Green. He looks up at Green, he looks back at the jersey. Wow. Thanks, Mean Joe. Thanks. Wow. Okay, anybody remember that commercial? Okay, you're awake. All right, good. It's a classic. I think of that little boy in that commercial, that elated, thankful little boy, overwhelmed with appreciation. He doesn't know what to say. A real game jersey. Now this may sound kind of strange, but I think of that little boy when I read the story of Jesus healing those lepers. In the passage we just read today from Luke, Jesus is going about his business, it says. And as he entered a village, he's abruptly approached by 10 what the Bible calls lepers. 10 these folks who have leprosy. It's this nasty disease. It eats at your skin. It causes your fingers and toes to be deformed. You can imagine the stigma. These guys were outcasts. They were ostracized. In a culture where you're either in or you're out, these guys were way, way on the outside. And as Jesus meets them on the road, they call out to him, "Jesus, have mercy on us." It's as if they say, "Jesus, please don't exclude us like everyone else. Jesus, tell us. Please, Jesus, tell us we're at least worth something to you. Jesus, help us." And the story says that Jesus gives them instructions, as a good Jew would have in those days. Go and see the priest. He will make you clean, he says. And so they listen, and as they turn, headed for that temple, lo and behold, along the way to the temple, it says they're made clean. along the way, they're healed. They're made whole again. And the story says that one of those 10, just one of them, he lags back. He lagged behind. He turned around and lagged back from the others. I imagine not all that unlike that little boy in that 70s Coke commercial. He's elated. He's overjoyed. He's unable to contain himself, knowing now that he was in the presence of someone great. He can't believe what's just happened. Like that boy, I imagine him going, "Whoa, Jesus, thank you." The Bible says that he threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, overjoyed, tripping over his own feet, not knowing what to say. I imagine he thanked Jesus again and again and again. And Jesus, in the last line of our reading, says these words, "Your faith has made you well." Like many of you, I'll never forget when our first child was born. Our first child was born. His name is Lars. The story has to do with Lars's grandparents. Are there any grandparents here today? Raise your hands, grandparents. Okay. I might poke fun at you. See, here's the deal. When Katie went into labor, we told all 4 of our parents that it was most likely, Kate, we were going to be at the hospital all day. So don't come. We'll be fine. We'll call you once the baby is born. Grandparents, tell me, are any of you good at following directions? And I didn't think so. So Lars was born, and not a couple minutes later, the nurse, sort of annoyed, said to us, I didn't want to tell this to you earlier, but there are 4 eager, very eager, she said, grandparents out in the waiting room who are eager to meet their first grandson. And I'll never forget when I wheeled Lars out. They put him in this little bassinet, and I was able to wheel it out to grandparents there. And there at the end of the hall is my father-in-law. Raise your hand if you're a father-in-law. Yeah, no. Now, my father-in-law is sort of this big and imposing guy. He's a big, smart guy. He's sort of an academic. He's an English professor by trade. He's an expert in Shakespeare. And so he's a guy, well, he still corrects my grammar to this day. He's the kind of guy who's always put together. He doesn't show emotion. Emotions are kind of a sign of weakness. He's always collected. But I'll never forget how there at the end of the hall stood my father-in-law. And as I rolled that baby towards him, I looked up and I saw this large, imposing man with buckets and buckets of tears rolling down his face. His shirt was just drenched, and his body just sort of shook. I think of my father-in-law when I think of the joy that leper who lagged behind must have had, overcome with joy, overcome with thankfulness that he just couldn't contain himself. He couldn't keep it all together. He was so thankful that he had to turn back. Tears flowing, his body shaking, because he'd been given his life back. He'd been given his life back. You see, folks, it's in the details here. At the beginning of the story, Jesus is wandering where he probably shouldn't have been. He's way out in what would have been known as sort of a no man's land, out between Galilee and Samaria. And there, he was around people he shouldn't have encountered. He was around those Samaritans. These were outcasts, outsiders. Those who didn't follow their rules, and so they were ostracized. And Jesus was healing people whom he had no business interacting with. These guys weren't only Samaritans, they were lepers. They were the untouchables. They belonged to a colony. They should have been in a colony, off by themselves. And when they approach Jesus, it says they even know this because they keep their distance. They know not to get too close to the rest of the people for fear of infecting. And as I read this story, I wonder how many people those lepers had approached for help. Would the doctors even see them? How long had they suffered? How much rejection had they known? But folks, when Jesus steps onto the scene, even these lepers, these outcasts of all outcasts, they're made clean, it says. They're made whole. We might even say they got their lives back. Jesus gives them their lives back. And this sort of thing seems to happen again and again with Jesus. Again and again, when Jesus steps on the scene in the story of our faith, people's faith seems to make them well. Again and again, Jesus says, your faith has made you well. The outcasts get their life back. When Jesus encounters an outcast woman with a bit of a questionable reputation, she barges in on Jesus and washes his feet with her tears. And Jesus says to her, your faith has made you well. And she's forgiven. She's made whole. She gets her life back. When Jesus encountered an unclean, outcast woman who suffered from hemorrhages, it says for 12 years, who'd spent all she had on doctors, and no one could cure her, Jesus steps on the scene, and Jesus says, help me here. Your faith has made you well. Yeah. And she gets her life back. Jesus encounters an outcast, blind beggar. And again, Jesus says, your faith has made you well. And he gets his life back. Folks, I think sometimes when we look at these stories, we get kind of hung up on how could Jesus have healed and what did that look like? And of course, we don't know what all the physical side of these healings were all about. But what we do know is that somehow, some way, each of these characters that Jesus encounters along the way, they get their lives back. They're overwhelmed, they're overcome with joy because their lives are made whole again. That outcast Samaritan leper in our story, all of a sudden, he's no longer a nobody, an outcast. All of a sudden, he's somebody. All of a sudden, he has a place in society. His life has worth. Maybe the most important healing that happens is that he isn't ignored anymore. He isn't excluded anymore. Rather, he's somebody. He gets his life back. Folks, we know, don't we? We all know people like this leper. People we in society shun. People put on the outside. Those excluded from all that we deemed the good life, right? Because of their lot in life, all that goes on in our society, we know that we don't like to admit it, right? There are plenty of people we might call nobodies. Far too many outcasts. And just maybe you've been in that place before, huh? Felt as though you're on the outside with the loss of a job or a tough upbringing or a medical condition or a body that doesn't allow you to do what everyone else can do. Huh? But here's the deal. Here's the deal in this story. Through the eyes of faith, this leper no longer finds himself at arm's length. But through the eyes of faith, he's part of the community. And in that community, the gift Jesus gives him is that he has a place. His life has meaning. Through the eyes of faith, eyes that look out for the poor and the outcast, his life all of a sudden had value. Through the eyes of faith, eyes that see no distinction between an insider and an outsider, he was given a new life. Through the eyes of faith, all are welcome. All have a place. Jesus says, your faith, this faith we share, it's made you well. It's made us well. And I think, folks, through the eyes of faith, we know that the world around us does look different, doesn't it? We look differently because of our faith at our neighbors. We look different through the eyes of faith. That guy on the street looks different, huh? Those noisy kids at a restaurant look different. The poor, the rich, our wealth, our work, our lives. Those on the other side of the globe or the other side of the tracks. Folks, don't we know that through the eyes of faith, the world looks different? And like those lepers, don't we know that there are plenty of things that infect our lives, our world? things that make us sort of sick, like the lepers, our materialism, our uncomfort with things like race, our own sort of strange religious intolerance, family tensions. And in the past couple of weeks, we've seen how the sickness of our political ideologies have threatened to bring our country to a standstill. It seems to me, folks, that Jesus reminds us today that through the eyes of faith, just maybe the world could look a little bit different. Just maybe through the eyes of faith, our neighbors, our enemies, our friends, and our strangers, through the eyes of faith, they look different. And for that, maybe like that leper, we can give thanks. We might even be a little overwhelmed with joy every now and then, because we too get this new life we find in Christ, a different life. Folks, today Jesus says, your faith has made you well. And I think that's our prayer, that this faith might continue to make us well, and that we might know that great joy. Thanks be to God. Amen.